I'm 55 years old now, and for most of my life, I learned how to live with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy silence that follows things you are never supposed to remember. The kind that sits in your chest and wakes you up at 3 in the morning with questions you don't dare ask out loud. I was not a soldier. I was not a spy. I was an engineer. For more than 30 years, I worked on classified aerospace systems, propulsion failures, electromagnetic shielding, materials that behaved strangely under pressure. I fixed things that had no manual, things that were never meant to fail. That was why they called me. The invitation did not come by email, phone, or letter. It came as a knock on my door at dawn. 2 men in grey suits, no names, no explanations. 1 sentence only. You've been cleared for a location that does not officially exist. They never said its name. They didn't need to. The flight was silent, no windows, no conversation. When we landed, the desert heat pressed against the aircraft like a living thing. I remember thinking how empty the land looked, miles of nothing, as if the world itself had chosen to forget this place. After hours of checkpoints, biometric scans, and doors that sealed behind us with a finality that made my stomach tighten, we descended, down and down and further down. The underground complex was vast, humming softly like a restrained machine. White corridors, cold light. The air smelled of metal and ozone. People passed me without looking, as if eye contact itself was forbidden. Finally, we stopped in front of a door unlike the others, thicker, darker, seamless. One of the men turned to me and said almost casually, "What you are about to see has caused grown men to lose their faith." The door opened. Inside was a hangar so large I could not see the ceiling. Floodlights illuminated something at the center, something that made my mind reject what my eyes were seeing. A craft, not a plane, not a helicopter, not anything built by human hands. It had no visible seams, no rivets, no wings. Its surface looked metallic, yet it flowed like liquid frozen mid-motion. Symbols, geometric, shifting, moved faintly across its skin, as if the craft itself were thinking. And it was damaged. Sections of its hull were darkened, warped inward, as though space itself had pressed against it too hard. The room vibrated with a low frequency. I felt more in my bones than my ears. "This object landed here in the late 1980s, a voice said behind me. "Emergency descent, controlled but unstable." I couldn't speak. Then came the sentence that changed everything. The pilot survived. They led me to a sealed chamber adjacent to the hangar. I expected glass. I expected restraints. I expected something monstrous. What I saw instead shattered every expectation. The being was smaller than a human adult. Its form was fragile, almost delicate. Its skin had a muted, pale tone, not grey, not white, but something in between. Its eyes were large, dark, and impossibly calm. It did not move, but the moment I looked at it, my head filled with images, not words, images, stars being born, worlds collapsing, Earth, primitive, violent, young. I staggered backward, gasping. "He's communicating," one of the scientists whispered. "Not with sound, with cognition." The being was weak, dying. They explained that the craft was not merely transportation, it was an extension of the pilot, a symbiotic system. The damage to the ship was slowly killing him. That was why I was there. "You can fix it," they said, "or he dies." I asked the question that had been burning in my chest since I walked in. Why me? No one answered, but the being did. This time, the image was clear. A memory, a young boy kneeling beside a bed, asking God questions no adult had answered, and then a feeling, gentle, patient, unmistakable. "You still ask." That was the moment I realized something far more terrifying than the alien itself. Whatever this being was, it knew me, And it had not come here by accident. They did not give me time to recover from the shock. Within hours of my arrival, I was escorted back into the hangar. The craft hovered slightly above the platform, unsupported, defying gravity without sound or visible force. The closer I stood to it, the more my skin prickled, as if the air itself resisted my presence. "This isn't machinery," one of the senior scientists said quietly. "It's more like biology." That sentence followed me like a warning. I was assigned a sealed workstation facing the damaged section of the hull. Tools, unlike anything I had used before, slid into place automatically, responding not to touch, but to proximity. Screens activated without displaying numbers, symbols, or text, only shifting patterns, colors, and pulses. There were no manuals, no schematics, no language I recognized. Instead, there was sensation. When I reached toward the damaged area, a pressure built behind my eyes. Images flooded my mind, layers upon layers of information compressed into instinct. I did not learn how the craft worked. I remembered. I saw energy folded like fabric. I understood that what humans call propulsion was merely the byproduct of intention guided through dimensional tension. The craft did not move through space. It convinced space to move around it. Every adjustment I made felt less like repair and more like communication. When I aligned one fractured segment, the hull responded with a subtle vibration, almost like a breath being released. And then something happened that none of us were prepared for. The being awakened, not physically. Its body remained still behind the translucent barrier. But my thoughts were no longer my own. I felt presence, not intrusive, not violent, simply there. The images changed, no longer cosmic or abstract. Now they were personal. My childhood home, my mother's voice, a memory of kneeling beside my bed, asking why God never answered. I staggered back, ripping the neural interface from my temples. "You're not supposed to access its consciousness directly," someone shouted. But it was already too late. That night, sleep abandoned me. When I closed my eyes, I saw patterns, vast, orderly, deliberate. The universe not as chaos, but as architecture. Every star placed with intention, every extinction balanced by emergence. At some point near dawn, I felt it again. Not in the hangar, in my quarters. The being did not speak, but its presence filled the room like a quiet tide. Images formed slowly, carefully, as if it feared overwhelming me. It showed me itself, not its body, but its role. A traveler, an observer, a caretaker of thresholds between worlds. Its species did not worship gods. They studied consciousness. They believed reality itself was shaped by awareness. That belief had led them outward, across dimensions humans could not yet perceive. Then it showed me Earth, not as a target, not as a resource, as a convergence. I felt its confusion, even its reverence. Humanity fascinated them, not because of technology, but because of contradiction. Violence paired with compassion, fear alongside faith, logic coexisting with belief in the unseen. And then came the image that made my breath catch. A figure, not alien, not human, light without shape, presence without form. The being did not name it, but the emotion attached to the image was unmistakable. Recognition, respect, something close to awe. The next day, I returned to the hangar shaken but focused. Repairs accelerated. The craft responded faster now, as if our interaction had synchronized something between us. The scientists were uneasy. "We're observing changes in you," one of them admitted. "Neurological activity outside normal parameters, emotional regulation improving, fear responses diminishing." They said it like a diagnosis. I felt it like clarity. By the end of the week, the core system stabilized. The craft's surface no longer dimmed. The vibration in the room softened into a steady, reassuring hum. That was when the being made a request, not a demand, not an order, a question. It showed me a memory of my life, every moment I had questioned God, doubted, searched, and ultimately buried those questions beneath reason and routine. Then a simple feeling followed. When the repair is complete, you may ask. I understood immediately. This was not about alien technology, not about government secrets, not even about first contact. I had been brought here because I carried a question no human institution could answer, and whatever waited beyond that question was far more dangerous and sacred than anything hidden beneath the Nevada desert. By the third week inside the facility, time stopped behaving the way I remembered. Days blurred together, but my mind felt sharper than it had in decades. Hunger faded. Fatigue became optional. The more I worked on the craft, the more I sensed that something within me was being quietly adjusted, not altered, not controlled, but aligned. The scientist noticed. My reaction times improved. My hands stopped shaking entirely. Medical scans showed neurological patterns they couldn't classify. One of them joked nervously that I was becoming optimized. They didn't realize how close they were to the truth. The craft no longer felt foreign. When I stood near it, I felt calm, safe, as if I was standing beside something that had known me long before I knew myself. The damaged sections of the hull responded almost instantly now, reshaping under my guidance like living tissue, remembering its original form. Then came the night they lost control of the situation. I was alone in the hangar, running final diagnostics. The lights dimmed without warning. Not a power failure, an intentional withdrawal. The low hum deepened into a resonance that vibrated through my chest. I should have called security. Instead, I stood still. The barrier around the being dissolved silently. No alarms, no shouts, no running footsteps. Just silence, thick and absolute. For the first time, I saw it move. It rose slowly, weightless, its form shimmering faintly as if partially out of phase with our reality. Its eyes met mine, and this time there were no images at first. Only emotion, gratitude, curiosity, and something like concern. The presence in my mind expanded, not aggressively but completely. I felt as though a door I had spent my life keeping closed had been gently opened from the inside. You may ask now, the feeling conveyed. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the realization that the question I had buried for 40 years was about to be heard by something that could actually answer it. I did not ask about alien civilizations. I did not ask about technology or the future of humanity. I did not ask why they had come to Earth. I asked the question that had followed me since childhood. Is God real? There was no immediate response. Instead, the hangar dissolved. I was not taken somewhere else. I was taken away from scale, distance, and linear time. I perceived layers of reality unfolding simultaneously, like pages stacked atop one another, each vibrating at its own frequency. Then came the answer, not in words, in understanding. I understood that what humans call God is not confined to one dimension, one species, or one narrative. I understood that consciousness did not emerge by accident. It was seeded, cultivated, and sustained. And then something unexpected happened. The being did not continue the explanation. It stepped aside, and something else stepped forward. The presence I had felt before, the one the being regarded with reverence, now filled everything. It was not overwhelming. It was intimate, personal. It knew me completely, yet judged nothing. I didn't see a face, but I knew who it was, not through doctrine, not through scripture, but through recognition that bypassed reason entirely. Jesus, not as humanity portrays him, not confined to culture or era, but as a conscious presence that existed across dimensions, anchored in love, sacrifice, and choice. He did not speak of sin the way churches do. He spoke of fear. He did not condemn doubt. He acknowledged it as part of growth. He explained that faith was never meant to replace reason, but to give it direction. And then he said something that shattered me. You were never abandoned. You simply stopped listening. I felt my entire life compress into a single moment. Every mistake, every loss, every quiet prayer unanswered, not because it was ignored, but because the answer required patience. The presence receded gently. The hanger returned. The being stood before me again, weaker now, its task complete. I understood that facilitating this meeting had cost it something: energy, time, maybe more. It conveyed one final truth. Its species did not worship Jesus. They recognized him as a fixed point in the structure of reality, a consciousness that chose to experience humanity, not to rule it, but to guide it without force. The alarms finally sounded then. Guards stormed in. Scientists shouted. The barrier snapped back into place. The being collapsed, its form dimming. I stood there shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of what I now carried. I had repaired a craft, but something far more profound had been repaired within me, and I knew with terrifying certainty that what came next would force me to choose between silence and truth. After the alarms, everything changed. The facility that had operated like a quiet machine suddenly felt like a cornered animal. Men with rifles filled the corridors. Security lights pulsed red. Voices echoed through intercoms, clipped and angry. I was pulled from the hangar so quickly, my boots barely touched the floor. They put me in an interview room without windows, bolted a metal chair to the ground, and left me there for what felt like hours. The air was cold enough to sting my lungs. On the other side of the glass, silhouettes shifted, people watching without wanting to be seen. When the door finally opened, it wasn't a soldier who walked in. It was a woman in a dark suit with calm eyes and a folder that looked too thin to contain what she was about to do to my life. "My name is irrelevant," she said. "What matters is that you understand your status." I tried to speak. My throat was dry, my mouth full of sand. She placed the folder on the table and slid it toward me. Inside were photographs. Me in the hangar. Me standing near the craft, me staring at the being, and then one photo that turned my stomach. A thermal image, my body, but glowing in patterns I had never seen. Around my head, a halo of heat that looked almost like wings. "They tell me you experienced an event," she said carefully. "A cognitive anomaly. Exposure." I swallowed. It wasn't an anomaly. Her expression didn't change. "For the purposes of your survival, it is." Then she leaned in slightly and lowered her voice. "You will not describe what you saw. You will not write it. You will not hint at it. If you attempt to disclose anything, your life will end quietly, and you will be remembered as someone who died in an accident no one investigates." There was no drama in her tone. No threat in her posture, just certainty. I looked down at my hands. They were steady, too steady. I should have been afraid, but fear had become distant, like a memory of something I used to feel. She noticed. "That's part of the concern," she said. "Your psychological profile has shifted. We don't understand the mechanism. We do understand the risk." I forced myself to ask, "What happened to the pilot?" Her eyes flickered, just once. "It is alive, barely." Then she stood and opened the folder to another page, a diagram of the craft's interior. At the center, a structure labeled Core Interface. Around it, red notes and warning symbols. "We found something in the ship after your incident," she said. "Something we did not have access to before." My stomach tightened. "What?" She pushed a single photograph across the table. It was a sequence of frames, like an MRI, but not of a body. It looked like a map of a space that should not exist. Geometries inside geometries, spiraling into a point of light. And around that point were symbols, those same living shapes that moved across the craft's skin. "Your presence unlocked it," she said. "Or perhaps it used you to unlock itself." I stared at the image and felt the pressure behind my eyes again. Not a flood this time, just a pulse, like something knocking politely at the door of my mind. "You're still connected," she observed. I didn't answer. The truth was I could still feel it. Not the being specifically, but the after effect, like the echo of a voice that had spoken directly into my soul, and beneath that echo, the faintest impression of something watching patiently without force. Jesus, not as a hallucination, not as a dream, as a presence that had touched reality in a way reality could not erase. The woman closed the folder. "We're moving the craft," she said. "We're isolating the pilot. We're increasing containment protocols. You will return to your quarters. You will rest. Tomorrow you will sign your final agreements. Then you will be relocated under a new identity." I shook my head slowly. "You think paperwork can contain this?" For the first time, her calm cracked. "Do you want the truth?" she said. "Nothing contains it. That's the problem." She gathered the folder and paused at the door. "One more thing," she added. "If you ever feel compelled to ask questions again, don't. Whatever answered you may not answer kindly a second time." Then she left, and the door sealed with a final click that sounded like a coffin closing. I sat alone, staring at my reflection in the one-way glass. And I realized something that chilled me more than any threat. They weren't just afraid of the alien. They were afraid of what I had become after speaking to Jesus. Because if one man could come back from that hangar changed, then the entire world could. And the people who controlled secrets could lose everything. That night I lay on the narrow bed in my quarters and tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that impossible map again. And I felt the same gentle, patient knocking in my mind. Not threatening, not forcing, simply waiting. As if something beyond the walls of Area 51 was preparing to show me the next truth, whether the government allowed it or not. They thought isolation would weaken the connection. They were wrong. After the interrogation, my access to the hangar was revoked. No more diagnostics, no more tools, no more proximity to the craft. I was officially medically monitored, which was just a polite way of saying I was being watched every second of the day. Cameras followed my movements. Sensors tracked my vitals. Even my dreams, they claimed, were being analyzed. But none of that mattered, because whatever had been awakened inside me no longer required proximity. It was already there. On the third night of isolation, I woke up with my heart racing, not from fear, but from urgency. The room was dark, lit only by the faint green glow of the monitoring panel on the wall. I sat up slowly, every instinct telling me something was about to happen. Then the pressure returned, not painful, focused. The air in the room seemed to bend, as if depth itself were losing coherence. I closed my eyes, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I understood that sight was no longer the correct sense. The map unfolded, not in front of me, but within me. It was the same structure from the photograph, the impossible geometry spiraling inward toward a point of light. But now I understood what I was seeing. It was not a location, it was a path, a convergence of consciousness where intention, awareness and choice intersected. The alien craft had not merely traveled through space, it navigated this structure, using consciousness as coordinates. And at the center of it all was that fixed point, the same presence, Jesus. I did not see him, I recognized him. The recognition came with understanding so complete it bordered on unbearable. I understood that his life on Earth was not an isolated event, but an insertion, a deliberate act into a specific layer of reality to alter its trajectory without violating free will. He did not conquer dimensions. He entered one and allowed himself to be wounded by it. That was the sacrifice, not death alone, but limitation. The realization broke something open inside me. Tears came without emotion attached to them, like pressure releasing after decades of containment. And then something unexpected happened. The presence receded slightly, and another awareness pushed forward. The being. We were not speaking in symbols now. There was no need. It conveyed urgency. Its time was ending. The damage to the craft had been repaired, but containment protocols were interfering with the symbiosis. The longer it remained grounded, isolated from the map, the more its consciousness degraded. And then came the truth that made my blood run cold. It had not crashed by accident. It had come because of us, because humanity was approaching a threshold, technological, cognitive, spiritual. A point where we would either recognize consciousness as fundamental or attempt to dominate it. Its mission was observation. But after decades among us, it had reached a conclusion. We were lost, not because we lacked intelligence, but because we had forgotten how to listen. It showed me flashes of other worlds, civilizations that advanced too quickly, severed themselves from meaning, and collapsed under the weight of their own control. It showed me others that endured, not because they were more powerful, but because they preserved reverence for something greater than themselves. Then it showed me Earth again, wars justified by ideology, faith turned into weapon, science stripped of humility, and finally it showed me the people running this facility. Men and women who believed secrecy equaled safety, who believed control equaled order, who believed truth was dangerous unless permission was granted. The being did not hate them, it pitied them. They cannot map what they refuse to feel, it conveyed. And then it asked me something I did not expect, not a command, a request. Will you remember? I understood what it meant. I would not be allowed to speak, not freely, not openly. My life would continue under layers of silence and denial. But memory could not be confiscated. Meaning could not be erased. The presence at the center, the one I now understood as Jesus, returned gently like a hand resting on my shoulder. No words, just assurance. That truth did not require volume. That faith did not require proof. That seeds planted quietly often outlast empires built on force. When the experience ended, I found myself lying on the floor, alarms blaring softly in the distance. Medical personnel rushed in, shouting orders, attaching sensors, demanding explanations. I gave them none. They ran tests for hours, brain scans, blood work, psychological evaluations. They found nothing they could classify as dangerous. That unsettled them more than any abnormality would have. The next morning, the woman in the dark suit returned. She looked tired now. "They're moving the craft within 48 hours, she said. "After that, your involvement ends permanently." And I met her gaze. "You can move it wherever you want," I said quietly. "You can bury it, dismantle it, or send it back where it came from." She frowned. And it won't matter." She waited. "Because what you're afraid of," I continued, "isn't under the desert anymore. It was inside me, and inside anyone willing to ask the question they were told never to ask. They released me without ceremony, no farewell, no explanation. Just a stack of documents slid across a metal table and a pen placed precisely within reach. New name, new employment history, new address, a life folded neatly over the old one, as if identity itself were just another file to be archived. "You will forget this place," the woman in the dark suit said, standing across from me. Her voice was firm, but no longer cold. "That is the expectation." I signed, not because I agreed, but because resistance would have been pointless. They escorted me out before dawn. A long drive through the desert, no conversation. When the vehicle finally stopped, I stepped out onto cracked asphalt beside an unmarked road. The car turned around and vanished into the dust. Just like that, Area 51 erased me. For the first time in weeks, I stood under an open sky. The air felt heavier. No hum, no resonance, no watchful silence pressing against my thoughts. Only wind, distant mountains, and the slow realization that the most guarded secret on Earth was now something I carried alone. The first weeks were the hardest, not because I feared retaliation, but because the connection faded. The pressure behind my eyes softened, the clarity dulled, the sense of alignment that had felt so natural inside the facility became intermittent, like a signal losing strength. At first, panic set in. I worried that I had imagined everything, that stress, isolation, and classified technology had manufactured a spiritual hallucination, that the presence I identified as Jesus was nothing more than my mind searching for meaning in chaos. But then small things began to happen, subtle things. I would sit alone in my apartment and feel a sudden calm wash over me, unprovoked and complete. I would dream, not images, but understanding, waking with solutions to problems I hadn't consciously been thinking about. Once, while walking past a hospital, I felt an overwhelming urge to stop and pray for a stranger I never met. I didn't hear a voice, I didn't see light, but the orientation remained, like a compass that no longer needed calibration. That's when I realized something critical. The connection hadn't been severed, it had been internalized. The being had used the craft to navigate the map. Jesus didn't need one. Months passed. I started my new job. I learned my new name. I answered questions about a life that wasn't mine with practiced ease. To the world, I was just another aging engineer, quietly fading into routine. But inside, the understanding matured. I stopped trying to explain what I had experienced. Explanation shrinks truth. Instead, I observed how people lived, how fear shaped decisions, how certainty hardened into cruelty, how faith was often wielded like a weapon instead of carried like a light. And I began to understand why silence had been imposed on me, not to protect secrets, but to delay transformation. One evening, nearly a year after my release, I received an email from an address that didn't exist. No sender, no subject line. Just a single sentence. Do you still remember the map? My hands trembled, not with fear, but recognition. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That night, the dreams returned with intensity I hadn't felt since the hangar. The map unfolded again, not fully, but enough. I saw branching paths, possible futures shaped by collective choices. Some ended in collapse, others in quiet renewal. Humanity stood at a crossroads, just as the being had warned. And threaded through every viable future was the same constant. Not technology, not power, not control, choice. Jesus did not appear as a figure. He appeared as direction. A principle embedded in reality itself. Love without coercion. Truth without force. Presence without domination. That was when I understood the final reason I had been chosen, not because I was special, but because I was ordinary, an engineer, a skeptic, a man who trusted systems more than faith, and yet still asked the question when no one was listening. If someone like me could encounter that truth and remain grounded, then anyone could. The next morning, the email was gone. No trace, no follow-up. But something had shifted. I no longer felt like a man hiding from a secret. I felt like a witness waiting for the right moment, and I knew, deep in the quiet place where fear no longer reached, that the story was not finished, because the craft had been moved. The being had likely gone, but the map was still there, and more people were beginning to feel it. They just didn't know what to call it yet. For a long time, nothing happened. That was the most unsettling part. No dreams, no emails, no sudden surges of understanding. Life settled into something that looked almost normal from the outside. I worked, I slept, I paid bills, I smiled at neighbors whose names I never learned. But beneath the routine, I felt it. A tension in the background of reality, a quiet expectancy. It was like standing in a room moments before a storm breaks. No thunder yet, no rain, but the air heavy with anticipation. The first sign came through the news, a brief segment buried between market reports and celebrity scandals. A deep space observatory had detected anomalies, non-random patterns embedded in background radiation. The scientists dismissed it publicly as statistical noise. I didn't, because the pattern was familiar. That night, the map stirred. Not fully, just enough to confirm what my intuition already knew. This wasn't communication in the way humans understand it. No message, no greeting, no command. It was synchronization. Elsewhere in the world, people were experiencing the same thing in different forms. Sudden clarity, a collapse of old certainties, an urge to forgive someone they had carried resentment toward for years. Others reported dreams of light without imagery, presence without form. None of them used the same language, but the orientation was identical. Jesus was not announcing himself, he was realigning perception. I realized then how crude our expectations had always been. We waited for miracles that broke physics, signs that forced belief, but this was subtler and far more dangerous to existing power structures, because it required consent. I began to see patterns, religious leaders arguing publicly, but privately questioning doctrines they had never examined. Scientists quietly re-evaluating assumptions about consciousness. Governments increasing surveillance, unable to name what they sensed, slipping beyond their control. And through it all, no single authority to oppose, no enemy to point to, just people awakening to responsibility. The memory of the being returned, not as presence, but as context. Its species observed civilizations at moments like this. Some panicked and tightened control. Others tried to weaponize the unknown. A few, very few, allowed humility to guide them. Those survived. One evening, while walking home, I felt it sharply. The same focused pressure behind my eyes that had preceded every major shift. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk as the world blurred slightly around me. The map unfolded more clearly than ever before. And this time, I saw my place within it, not central, not important, just connected. I saw branching futures again, but now I understood something crucial. The outcome did not hinge on governments, technology, or disclosure. It hinged on individuals choosing love over fear in moments so small they barely registered. A conversation not avoided, a lie not told, an act of mercy no one applauded. This was how reality tilted, and this was why Jesus had never forced belief, because coercion collapses the map. It flattens possibility into obedience. Then came the realization that made my chest tighten. The being had not only come to observe, it had come to learn, to understand why, across countless worlds, only one produced a consciousness willing to enter its own suffering for the sake of others. That answer was still unfolding. At home, I sat in silence, hands resting on my knees, breathing slowly. For the first time, I spoke, not aloud but with intention. "I'm ready." The response was not immediate, it never was. But I felt the same reassurance that had followed me since the hangar. The same gentle certainty that whatever was coming would not be imposed. It would be invited. That night I dreamed of Earth from above, not as a globe, but as a living network of light. Some regions burned too brightly, brittle with control. Others flickered weakly, afraid to shine, and scattered among them were small, steady points. Quiet, resilient, enduring. I woke with tears on my face and peace in my chest. I finally understood the truth no institution could survive admitting. Disclosure was irrelevant. Revelation was already happening, and the most powerful force in the universe wasn't alien technology or divine intervention. It was the moment a human chose love when fear offered a faster path. That was the signal, and it couldn't be jammed. The invitation came without words, no email, no dream, no sudden pressure behind my eyes, just certainty. I was sitting alone at a cafe, watching steam rise from a chipped mug, when the feeling settled into place. Calm, precise, undeniable. I finished my coffee, stood up, and walked out without questioning why. Some decisions arrive fully formed. This was one of them. I drove for hours, guided not by directions but by alignment. Every turn felt obvious before I reached it. The city thinned into farmland, then into long stretches of road where cell service disappeared and radio stations dissolved into static. By the time I stopped, the sun was low. An abandoned church stood at the edge of the desert, roof partially collapsed, windows boarded, a place forgotten by both faith and bureaucracy. No cars, no lights, no signs of life. Except I wasn't alone. Inside, 7 people sat in a loose circle on broken pews. Different ages, different backgrounds. One woman wore a lab badge clipped to her jacket. Another man had hands roughened by manual labor. A young couple sat close together, fingers intertwined, eyes red, as if they'd been crying for days. They all looked up when I entered. No surprise, no greeting, just recognition. None of us spoke for a long time. Then the woman with the lab badge broke the silence. "I thought I was losing my mind," she said quietly. "I study neural correlates of consciousness. 2 months ago, my equations stopped working, not because they were wrong, but because they were incomplete." The man beside her nodded. "I haven't been to church in 20 years, but last week I forgave my brother. No reason, no benefit, just clarity." Each story was different, but the orientation was the same. None of them described visions of angels or alien craft. None claimed divine voices or supernatural commands. What they described instead was recalibration, a gentle but irreversible shift in how they perceived themselves in relation to others. Love without leverage, truth without threat, responsibility without shame. When it was my turn, I didn't tell them about Area 51. I didn't mention the craft or the being. I didn't need to. "I met something that helped me ask a question I'd avoided my entire life," I said. "And the answer didn't give me power. It gave me obligation." They understood immediately. That was when the pressure returned, stronger than ever, but shared now, diffused among us. The air in the church felt dense, expectant, as if reality itself were listening. The map unfolded, not just for me, but for all of us. I could feel it. No geometry this time, no spirals or light points, just connection. We were not being shown the future. We were being reminded that the future was participatory. And then, unmistakably, the presence returned. Not localized, not singular. It filled the space between us. Jesus did not appear as form or voice. He appeared as coherence, as alignment between intention and compassion, as the sudden, overwhelming certainty that every act of love, no matter how small, rippled across dimensions far beyond human perception. I understood then why governments feared this kind of awakening. There was nothing to regulate, nothing to license, nothing to suppress, because it didn't travel through media or technology. It traveled through choice. The being's role became clear in retrospect. Its species mapped consciousness the way humans map terrain. They identified convergence points. They observed outcomes. And among all known civilizations, Earth remained anomalous, not because of intelligence, but because of incarnation. Jesus had not merely visited humanity. He had entered it. He had bound infinite awareness to finite suffering, and in doing so, altered the topology of consciousness itself. The map wasn't a tool, it was a consequence. The meeting ended without ceremony. No vows, no plans, no hierarchy. We simply stood, embraced briefly, and left one by one, each carrying the same quiet responsibility. Outside, the stars burned steadily, indifferent and intimate all at once. As I drove home, I understood something that filled me with both hope and dread. This was not a movement. Movements can be dismantled. This was not a religion. Religions can be corrupted. This was an awakening that respected free will too much to force itself upon anyone. And that made it unstoppable, because the universe itself seemed structured to respond, not to belief, but to love enacted. The alien craft had shown me how reality could be navigated. Jesus had shown me why it should be, and humanity, whether ready or not, was beginning to feel the difference. They noticed the shift before they could name it. Not because of protests or riots or mass declarations of faith, but because their instruments began to fail in subtle ways. Prediction models lost accuracy. Behavioral analytics stopped converging. Systems designed to anticipate human response started returning probabilities instead of certainties. Choice had re-entered the equation. I learned this indirectly. A former colleague, using a channel that shouldn't have existed, sent me a single line buried inside an innocuous technical update. They're calling it the drift. Governments hate phenomena they cannot frame as threats. They hate it even more when those phenomena don't behave like enemies. There were no leaders to discredit, no slogans to suppress, no communications to intercept. People weren't organizing. They were changing, quietly. Workplaces reported unexplained drops in conflict. Prisons saw isolated reductions in violence that defied policy explanations. Hospitals documented patients requesting reconciliation with family members instead of additional medication. None of it was dramatic enough to headline. All of it was destabilizing. Inside classified circles, emergency committees formed, think tanks proposed narratives, psychological contagion, mass delusion, algorithmic side effects. Funding surged for countermeasures that assumed the presence of an external signal. They were looking in the wrong place. There was no broadcast to jam. The map did not transmit, it responded. I felt the attention turned toward people like me, not as suspects, but as variables. Individuals who displayed resilience to fear-based messaging. People whose decisions skewed toward compassion even under pressure. They began calling us anchors. The implication was clear. If anchors could be identified, they could be isolated. One night, as I walked home, a black SUV slowed beside me. The window rolled down just enough to reveal a familiar face, the woman in the dark suit. "You're becoming visible," she said calmly. "So are you," I replied. She didn't smile. "You were warned." "Yes," I said. "You were too." She studied me for a long moment, then spoke more softly. "This isn't about faith or aliens anymore, it's about control. You know how this ends." I did. I had seen the branches. Some futures ended in repression, surveillance tightened, language narrowed, dissent redefined. Others burned themselves out in panic, chasing enemies that didn't exist. But there were paths, thin, resilient paths, where the attempt to contain the drift accelerated it instead. Fear always sharpened choice. "You can still help," she said. "Tell us how it works." I shook my head. "It doesn't work for anyone. That's the point." She sighed, then nodded once. "Then this is goodbye." The SUV rolled away, leaving exhaust and inevitability behind. That night, the map returned with unprecedented clarity. I saw the craft, not physically, but conceptually, moving along a trajectory far beyond Earth's atmosphere, its symbiosis restored, its mission complete. The being was no longer observing outcomes. It was recording causes. and the cause that mattered most was not belief, it was choice under uncertainty. I understood then why disclosure had never been the goal. If humanity were told, officially, publicly, about alien observers and trans-dimensional consciousness, fear would have rushed in to fill the gap. Belief would be coerced. Meaning would collapse into obedience. Jesus had never asked for that. The map showed me him again, not as presence but as pattern. Wherever love was chosen without expectation, the structure of reality subtly rebalanced. Wherever power was used to compel rather than invite, the structure resisted. This wasn't mysticism. It was architecture. The universe favored freedom because freedom sustained complexity. Near dawn, messages began appearing online, fragmented, inconsistent, easily dismissed. People describing sudden awakenings, others reporting encounters with strangers that changed their lives in minutes. A few spoke of Jesus without dogma, without spectacle. Platforms adjusted algorithms, visibility dropped. But something else happened. People began listening offline, kitchen tables, hospital corridors, long walks at night, conversations where no one won and no one lost. The attempt to contain the uncontainable reached its peak a week later, when a coordinated narrative pushed across major outlets. A new syndrome linked to stress and social instability, characterized by excessive empathy and reduced threat perception. They tried to make love sound like pathology. It didn't hold. Because those experiencing the drift weren't detached from reality. They were more engaged than ever. I stood at my window, watching the city breathe, lights blinking, lives unfolding, choices being made quietly in every direction. For the first time since Area 51, I felt something like anticipation without fear. The map was converging, not toward catastrophe, toward decision. And I knew the final act would not be dramatic. No revelations in the sky, no voices from beyond. Just a simple question, arriving in millions of hearts at once, exactly as it had arrived in mine. What will you choose, now that fear no longer decides for you? I waited a long time before telling this story. Not because I was afraid of consequences, I had already accepted those, but because I needed to be certain of one thing, that what I experienced was not meant to impress, convert, or convince. It was meant to witness. At 55, I no longer chase meaning. Meaning has a way of finding you when you stop demanding it on your own terms. I live quietly now, no public platform, no following, no sermons disguised as revelations, just attention. Because attention, I've learned, is where choice is born. The drift didn't explode into history books or headlines. It did something far more subversive. It normalized decency in places where fear had once ruled. It made cruelty feel heavy. It made manipulation obvious. It made love, not sentiment, not romance, but deliberate compassion, feel practical. That terrified the right people. Attempts to contain it faded, not because they failed outright, but because they exhausted themselves. You cannot suppress something that does not oppose you. You cannot outlaw something that never organizes. You cannot silence something that speaks only when invited. The alien craft never returned. At least, not in a way that could be photographed or weaponized. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet enough to hear itself breathe, I feel the same sense of alignment I felt in the hangar. Not direction, not command, presence. I understand now what the being showed me, and why Jesus mattered in a way no doctrine could fully capture. Jesus was not sent to override humanity. He was introduced to anchor it, to bind infinite consciousness to finite vulnerability, and prove that love chosen freely could reshape reality more effectively than power ever could. The alien species understood that. They didn't worship him. They recognized the structural consequence of his choice. They saw how one act of voluntary suffering recalibrated the map of consciousness across dimensions. Earth became different, not holy, possible. That is what frightened those who thrive on control. Possibility resists prediction. Love resists leverage. Faith, true faith, resists ownership. I was never special. That is the most important part. I wasn't chosen because I was righteous, enlightened, or worthy. I was chosen because I was ordinary, skeptical, trained to fix systems, not surrender to mystery. If someone like me could ask the question sincerely, is God real? And accept an answer that came with responsibility instead of certainty, then anyone could. That is the secret no institution can monetize. Faith is not belief without evidence. It is choice without coercion. I don't expect you to accept this story. I don't need you to. Truth does not require agreement to function. I am telling it now because the moment has arrived where silence would no longer serve its purpose. Not because disclosure is necessary, but because testimony is. Not testimony about aliens, not testimony about secret bases, but testimony about what happens when fear loosens its grip and choice steps back into the center of human decision-making. If you feel unsettled reading this, that's normal. If you feel defensive, that's expected. But if quietly, briefly, you felt a sense of recognition rather than shock, then you already understand more than you think. The universe does not demand belief. It responds to alignment. The alien craft showed me how reality could be navigated. Jesus showed me why it should be. And humanity, whether ready or not, is learning that the most radical act available to any conscious being is not domination, not rebellion, not escape. It is love chosen freely without guarantee of outcome. That choice bends the map. It always has, and it always will. This is not the end of the story. It is the moment you realize the story was never about me. It was about what you choose next. If this story made you think, feel, or question something deep inside you, don't leave without showing it. Like this content to let me know you stayed until the end. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories that challenge reality, faith, and the unknown. Share this with someone who isn't afraid to question what they were taught. And now, one last thing. Comment the single word choice below. And also tell me from which country you're listening. That's how I'll know you truly heard the story.